Welcome to the aquaculture video for fisheries management. This is a survey through some of the species of types of animals and plants that are cultured around the world. So you get an idea of what sort of quantities and what sort of species are important in aquaculture. Alright, so 430 species according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and FishStat database. 103 of which are fish. And on Moodle there's a link to the report that lists all of the species. So 21 crustacean species, 43 mollusk species, many different micro and macro algae species like the Sundaria. And if we look at some of the main producers, carp is the biggest one, probably for fish. Carp has probably produced more than any other species. Well, there are multiple species of carp, but carp is probably the by volume the largest amount of fish produced. Okay, so this is a area in China that is dedicated to carp farms, and you can see that we really have no idea of the scale in New Zealand of some of the aquaculture production around the world. You can see this has got a river through it that they can use to flood these ponds, and so carp can be produced in large quantities, and these things can practically live in sewers because they're very tough and can tolerate all sorts of water conditions, which makes them an excellent choice. Okay, tilapia, another many different species of tilapia, but these things are also very tough, can live in densities of 600-700 per cubic meter when they're fairly small. But even when they get a bit bigger, they're just they can take low oxygen and very eutrophied water conditions. So they're very tough, very quick growing species that produce a nice fillet. Catfish is a big one around the world, and you see the typical south of the United States dish of a couple of veggies, coleslaw, black-eyed peas, a hush puppy, and a nice catfish fillet. There we go. Clams around the world, we've got lots of different kinds. Oysters are not clams, but they're grown in a similar way. So you've got oysters, mudflat clams, line raised clams, these ornamental giant clams, mussels. So obviously a big one here in New Zealand, but they're grown on these ropes and then cleaned off. So very good at filtering water of phytoplankton, and so easy, hardy animals that can be put on these lines and then cleared off in a year and a half. And a 200 meter or a 150 meter rope in New Zealand, you can get up to 25 tons in a year and a half. So you get massive growth, and they're very profitable. Oysters, again, reasonably big one in New Zealand, but huge in some other places. Okay. And shrimp, prawns, these Macrobranchium rosenbergii are the type that are seen at the Hookup Park Prawn Farm. They're a freshwater prawn, but most of them will be raised in brackish water, estuarine water, and that will be something that'll have a pond that's flooded by tidal inundation under controlled circumstances, and they're in coastal areas where they can feed the prawns in very high stocking densities, and then use the tide to flush the waste away from the prawn farm. Sturgeon for caviar and for food is becoming a bit of a probably one of the more cultured species around the world. Well, it's growing anyway, and this might be the savior or the salvation of beluga caviar, but because they are just very quickly disappearing from illegal fisheries in the wild. So this is why one of the ways that aquaculture can impact on fisheries management. Salmon are a huge one around the world. They're in temperate and cold water environments. You have lots of pen farming, and so these ones are raised with pelletized food, and also in New Zealand we have them in canals. So they're freshwater fish. These things can live in freshwater or salt water. So here's a picture of a canal. This is one of our ex-students who now manages a salmon farm down south in a canal, and you can see the pens behind him. And so these fish were he caught on 2 casts below the downstream of the salmon farms, and these are a big rainbow trout and a brown trout that are living downstream of the farms and eating the pellets that drift out of the salmon farm. Okay, so trout is another one. This is a rainbow trout. This one's being scanned to see how gravid the eggs are, but these are farmed in New Zealand for restocking purposes, for the sport fishery, and it's illegal to sell trout in New Zealand commercially, but in other places in the world, rainbow trout are farmed in large quantities in lots of cool water rivers around the world. Ornamental fish are farmed in many places, and you can set up a tank in your house if you want to keep the water warm. And so there are lots of small producers of ornamental fish of many varieties all around the world. Okay, worldwide, what's farmed in terms of fish species? 90% of the fish farmed is in Asia, and carp makes up the majority of it. Tilapia would be the second highest in terms of weight. Catfish, clams, mussels, oysters, shrimp, sturgeon, and trout. Okay, so these are the these make up the bulk of what is farmed around the world. Also, though, there are other species that can be considered to be aquacultured. Okay, so we've got things like frogs, turtles, crocs, alligators, sea squirts, tunicates, sponges. You can see the line culture for sponges here. And then there are lots of algae, not only the macroalgae like we saw before, but also microalgae like spirulina, which you'll see in aquaculture classes next year. But they're inoculated into a tank of water, seawater, and then grown to and then filtered out. So it's essentially like little single-celled organisms as well as big algae.